Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm Trevor with Maker Experiment, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about how to price your work. Let's get into it. I've made a video like this before where I created a free template that you could download in order to help you price your work. I've actually made an update to that template that took me quite a lot of time to figure out how I wanted to set it up and make it easier to use. So today we're going to walk through that. I will leave a link in the description below to that template. On the original version, it was more difficult to update things because you had to update formulas, you had to update different stuff if you decided to add rows to it, and you had to know how all of those formulas worked. In this version, I made it a lot simpler to use. I have broken it up in different tabs. So it focuses on three main areas. One is material, one is labor, and then one is all of your overhead costs. If you are somebody working out of your house or your garage and you're doing this more to make money on the side than to actually run a business, your overhead is going to be less, and therefore your pricing may be different. I will say that this is meant to be a guide for how to price your work, but it is not a hard and fast rule that you must do it this way. We've all started in the past where we've given stuff out for free in order to market ourselves and made it so that we could actually sell things in the future. We've also sold at rock bottom prices in order to get the job. No judgment here. We've all done it, myself included. If you want to step it up to the next level and you want to quit charging the hobby prices to compete with the other people on Etsy or things online, this video is for you. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the boring details, but I'm going to highlight what this new workbook has that might help you in your journey to pricing your work. So let's hop over to the computer and I will show you how it works. This workbook can be downloaded as an Excel file. You can also use it through Google Sheets. The first tab that I have is the instructions of how to use the workbook. So there are input tabs which have input in the front. There's a final tab and then a real versus quote tab. So just like I had mentioned, I broke this out into materials. There are two parts, both materials to make the product and then materials to ship it if you need to ship it. I have one for all of the overhead costs that I have. Now mine may be different than yours. And then I have my labor. If I switch over to the input material tab, you can see that I have a few blanks at the bottom, but I also have some that are pre-filled out. What I like to do is I like to have what the material is and the size, what the price per piece is, the quantity of that I need, as well as the URL from where I bought it. That way in the future, if I have a client that comes back and wants something 3 years later, which I have had happen, I know exactly what material I had and who I bought it through. If you need to add more than what I did here, you can add lines. Just note that you will have to make sure that you drag down the formulas for the total cost, taxes and shipping and things like that. The second tab that I have is my shipping tab. So this is for shipping materials. Think your boxes, your marketing material, foam, all of the packaging that you need in order to make your product stand out when it gets there. Same thing, if you want to add more lines than this, you might have to add in the formulas for certain columns, but the formulas are already there for all of the rows that are currently on the sheet. Then we go into our overhead. For me, the main overhead that I have is my equipment and the supporting equipment. I don't actually have a rent that I pay on this because I do it out of my house. Depending on your situation, you may want to account for part of that. I've decided that I'm not going to do that. But you can add in things like your rent, your insurance, all that type of stuff into your pricing. And I highly encourage you to do this if it's something that you don't bake into other prices. For me, I kind of bake that into my overall overhead costs with the machinery as well as my labor. So it's in there, it's just not specifically called out. One thing you will note on my overhead is when it comes to my operating costs for my machinery and equipment, I do have my kilowatt cost in there, and then there's a formula in the background that helps convert that into a dollar amount. Depends how nerdy you want to get. You can just use the default here, plug in the cost per kilowatt hour, and then use the same assumptions. Totally up to you. Next, I have my labor tab. So for me, I mostly just have the labor costs and any design fee. You can set this up however you'd like to do it. I do the design fee as number of revisions on the design because the design itself is based more on labor. The way that I set up my labor is any labor that I need, as well as any design fees. So design fee is a one-time fee. Now, if they want multiple iterations of a design and they kind of get out of control, I do make that higher. But most of my labor is just my labor fee. And that's just me for myself. I only have one labor fee. If you have employees and you have multiple labor fees, you may want to think about adding lines here. Once you put all of the stuff into the input tabs, you will come to the final price tab. I've made some updates to this section. One thing that I've updated that I didn't have in the past was I include a mock-up of the design and what it looks like so that I can share that with the customer. I will also add in their name, their address, and their email so that I know how to get a hold of them. A lot of the reason why I set this up on its own separate tab is I can adjust things as needed, because if there's a specific price that I know I have in mind and I'm trying to kind of back into that price, I can adjust things on this end so that I know kind of what hit I'm going to take. For example, for shipping, if I'm not going to be shipping it, I can eliminate it here and make it 0, and this will adjust my price. For my profit margin desired, this is how much profit I'd like to have in the item that I'm making. And then your material fee, your shipping materials fee, overhead fee, and labor fee are all buffers, right? So if you're going to be perfect and you have no plans on making any mistakes, if you make all of those 0, you can drop the price that way as well. If you're somebody that likes to bank on maybe mistakes happening, or you need to order a little bit more material just in case, you can put that buffer factor in, and it just depends on what you want that to be. If you have a sales tax, you can add that in as well. If it's 0, you can also deduct that, and it will make a difference. There's only a couple of states that I know of that don't have a sales tax, so depending on your state and what you're doing, you may need to include that. So you can see here that if I'm making a 12 by 24 inch sign based on my materials and based on the profit margin that's currently in here, if I want to ship this, then I would need to charge $464.13 in order to get to the profit margin and all of these buffers that I am accounting for. Typically, when I do mine, I might do the overhead and labor as a buffer, but the material and the shipping stuff, I usually don't. So I usually bring those to 0. And the profit margin is really where you can make up the bulk of that difference. Say, for example, the budget was $350. Right now I'm at $444. There's a couple ways you can do this. One, you can offer cheaper materials, but your labor may go up. Kind of depends on what you want to do. You can sacrifice profit margin in order to get the job. So in order to get to about $350, this would have to be about 35%, which is still a very good profit margin. The danger you get into is if you're doing an engraved cutting board or something that's all over the internet and everybody can do, your profit margin may be 5%, 10%, and then you have to ask yourself, is this really worth doing? So at the end of the day, that's something that you'll need to ask yourself. Once I have all of the final price stuff set up, and I can see exactly what it's going to be, I can tell that under materials, it's going to be about $77, almost $78 for materials. Shipping materials is about $15. This is foam. This is the box. This is all the stuff that I put into the packaging. Overhead cost is about 20 bucks, and then labor is 66. So the actual cost to produce the sign is $208. The cost plus the profit margin is $320. Then you add on your sales tax. So the total price would be $341, meaning that my total profit will be about $112 to make this sign. So what I would then do is I would tell the customer what it's going to cost. I'd send them an image of what the mock-up is going to look like, and then make sure I get their approval to move forward and send them the invoice. Once I've done all that, I've added a new tab that is a real versus quote. What this tab is for is determining how close was the real thing to what I quoted. The main reason I put this in here is because sometimes I have not quoted correctly, and I want to see if I made a mistake somewhere so that I can adjust my quoting in the future. So it gives me a better baseline of what I'm doing and where I might need to make changes. Here I'm going to start with materials. So I said it was going to cost $78. Let's just say that that's true. So I'm going to say 78. Shipping is the materials for shipping. So this was about $20. The overhead I'm going to say was $25. Labor and machining, let's say that it's the same as $50. Shipping to customer, let's say that that was 30 because that's what I put on the other one. In this case, I'm going to use a state that didn't have sales tax, which was Oregon. When I come down here, the selling price was the $341.81. The cost was about $203, which means I actually made $138, and my profit margin was 40.61%. My target was 35, so I did a good job and actually was on the better end. I didn't eat more into my profit than I expected. I actually was a little bit better. But that's the intent of this sheet, is to help you gain a better understanding of how you're pricing, how it's actually going, and then what you might need to change in your strategy. I do have a few tips for you on how to save money when you are pricing, especially if you are used to buying things one at a time and not in bulk. There's a couple of things that I've done on the signage side that have helped me save money. One, buying acrylic in bulk. In the past, I may have bought just what I needed for a sign. So for example, go out to Houston Acrylics or Cerulean Tide, something like that, and I have bought just the sheet size that I needed. And that works great for a one-off business. But the cost per sheet can be higher than if you were to buy a full 4x8 sheet of material all at once. So I did find suppliers for certain colors and certain finishes that I can buy the entire sheet, and my actual cost per sheet is cheaper than if I were to buy one sheet at a time. So that's one way that I have been able to save money on material. Another one is if I'm doing just indoor signage, I have a different adhesive that is cheaper than the 3M that I normally use. And that one is the dual tight tape. And the cost per roll is significantly different for those. Now, the dual tight doesn't seem to work as well exterior wise with temperature changes. So I still use the 3M there, but for interior signage, it works really well. Another thing that I have done with some of my signage is I will buy a lot of the same color. So clear or black or white, something like that. And then I can actually use my UV printer to print color onto it that actually gets me closer to the colors they want anyway. It just depends on the project, but by combining laser and UV, you can buy bulk of a single color of acrylic and then just print the color that you need onto it. And it does end up being cheaper printing it that way than it is by buying specific colors and having to store that somewhere. As you're thinking about pricing in your business, if you're able to buy items in bulk, that will save you a lot of money. If you can buy your shipping supplies in bulk, if you can buy all your other stuff in bulk, it will be much cheaper per piece and you'll be able to add to your profit margin. Now, we're not all in the same situation, and sometimes we need to be able to buy things as one-off items, but I encourage you to start using that as your mentality of how do I really scale this and be able to buy maybe 50 at a time or 100 at a time instead of just doing one here or two here. Hopefully this video has been helpful. If you're interested in the new guide, I put a link in the description below where you can go to that. If you had my old guide that was free, by all means, continue to use that one if you'd like. But I wanted to provide some updates that I made to my new pricing template that I thought would be beneficial for all of you. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so that you know when I come out with new videos. Be sure to check out my social media channels at Maker Experiment. But I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and I will see you in the next one.